Welcome, everyone. Very delighted to have Aroj. Sorry if I misspelled your name. Who is helping us with the technical issues in this group. And shortly, very shortly, in the next 1 or 2 minutes, we'll be starting. We'll be sharing a few things about what's happening in Africa regarding climate change, and then we'll have a very good discussion among ourselves. I'm very happy to see many of the CC African volunteers here and some of you from other parts of the world. We hope to have a very good conversation today. So Aroj, I think we can start right away. My name is David Michael from CCL Africa. And today we'll be talking about the climate change crisis in Africa and the opportunities. So Africa is one of the continents that is most vulnerable to the impact of climate change due to its high exposure and also low adaptive capacity. You are all aware that the continent contributes very little to greenhouse gas emissions, but it's already been affected by climate change impact. And one of the ways through which climate change impacts the continent is drought. The drought conditions are becoming more severe in Africa due to climate change. And projections show that going forward, there will be more severe drought in the continent. It is already happening. Droughts have serious impact on food supply, on water, global health, and then infrastructure, of which most African countries do not have. So you can see that in Egypt, sometime in 2013, there was severe drought that farmers couldn't plant. Women have to walk kilometers to get water for their domestic needs. As you can see, a group of women drawing water from a hand-dug well. This is what I witnessed myself. A very close farmer who is a friend who planted corn on the onset of the rain, and after a few months, the rains wouldn't come and everything scorched to death. And this is a typical story across the continent because majority of the farmers, 70% of them, depend on rain-fed agriculture. So when there is no rains, it means no food. It's the same situation for herders. In most parts of Africa, in Nigeria, my country, we don't have ranches. So herders move around with their cows looking for grasses and foliage. And with drought and no grass, no food, most of the animals die. The health impacts. Many of you are already aware that the #1 killer disease in the world is mosquito and not even COVID. But yes, COVID-19 is here, and not looking at the conspiracy theories, we believe that it also came from wildlife. So with extreme heat, more disease, the mosquitoes breed more, so you have a lot more disease. Air pollution also affects people generally, and then there is vectors and other hosts and pathogens that produce more during this period. So there is a lot more disease in Africa. So when the rains don't come, we cry. And when the rains come, we also cry because they come with high intensity, and then there is flooding all over the place, destroying infrastructure, destroying farmlands, among other things. Another issue which is not so new, is crisis and conflict, which have all over the continent because people are fighting for rights over water, rights over grasses, rights over land to farm. A typical example is what is happening in Nigeria, my country as well. The drying of Lake Chad is a major contributor to the Boko Haram crisis. And that is because many of the young people and women who were employed through fishing and agriculture are jobless, homeless, and they become very easy targets and easy recruits for the Boko Haram terrorist group. So, what is the main cost of climate change on the continent of Africa? There are quite many. Political instability, floods, wildfires, drought, storm damage, ocean acidification, infrastructure loss, climate refugees, species extinction, conflicts and wars, famine, water scarcity, ecosystem loss, even our way of life, infectious disease, and sea level rise, and even much more. Now, without climate action, we cannot attain the Agenda 2030. And I'm talking about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So if we don't take climate action, poverty will still be there, the zero hunger will not be achieved, the good health and well-being will be an issue, gender inequality, clean water and sanitation, affordable energy, and nearly all of the sustainable development goals are linked to the climate crisis. So, what are the solutions that Africa can offer? Africa, as a continent, as you know, contributes least to greenhouse gas emissions, but is very happy to be part of the solutions because it is one of the continents that is most affected. So, energy, renewable energy. 60% of the population in Africa do not have electricity. Renewable energy, especially solar, provides a great opportunity to lighten up Africa using clean energy. The impact is great. So we don't have to use coal to power the continent, but we can do it through clean energy, which is a major mitigation point. So let's look at energy for cooking. Nearly 60% of every home in Africa uses fuel wood for cooking. And it has a lot of consequences. Two, majorly, deforestation and the health issues. And the people who suffer more are women and children who get respiratory disease through black carbon, and of course, deforestation, cutting down of trees to be used as firewood for cooking, leading to a lot of issues: erosion, soil infertility, even flooding, loss of biodiversity, among other things. The solution is right very close to us. Africa is in the tropics. The sun is there. So why don't we provide the technology that will give people solar for cooking? As you can see on my right-hand side, clean energy, no smoke, zero emissions, and then we'll have food to eat while protecting and preserving our environment. Now, 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land is in Africa. This means that Africa can feed the world. And what is the kind of agricultural production we're looking at in this context? We are looking at sustainable, climate-smart agriculture. At the moment, what you have is clearly subsistence farming. You see a group of women or children owning quite very small piece of land to produce food that cannot even take them a year round. And of course, you have the herders who keep moving around with their cows. So there is a huge potential for carbon sequestration in Africa through our soils. If people are taught how to grow food organically, so we are eradicating methane, and then we are sequestrating carbon in our soils. So one of the other things Africa can offer, nature-based solutions, I've already talked about carbon sequestration. It's about reforesting the continent. We can't reforest Africa. Planting of mangroves. Most of the countries around the continent, especially in West Africa, have a lot of mangroves, which also serve as a hotspot for biodiversity and for carbon sequestration. Of course, we are conserving biodiversity as well as we are doing this. And then we are looking at integrated natural resources management on the continent. So as far as I'm concerned, Africa is still virgin. The lands are still virgin. We can reclaim, we can protect, and we can conserve. One of the solutions that I see as a major tool for poverty eradication in Africa is carbon pricing. As CCLers, we are very aware of the benefit of carbon fee and dividend. It provides basic income for all. It is good for the people. It is good for the economy. It is carbon neutral. But just to say that with COVID-19, a lot was exposed. Many people in Africa could not feed themselves. The government was not able to provide palliatives for people. So during the lockdowns, many people couldn't actually were locked down because they had to go out to look for what they will eat. Many will say that they prefer to die of coronavirus than the hunger virus. And this carbon pricing provides a great tool to ensure that every individual, every citizen has a basic income. In this case, I just call it basic climate income, such that with what we experienced during COVID-19, poverty will be eradicated using carbon pricing and, of course, carbon fee and dividend. And that is why for us CCL Africa, we're working very hard to ensure that African countries adopt carbon pricing and adopting the carbon fee and dividend mechanism, which we feel is the best for our continent. So we're encouraging all our countries to belong to the World Bank's Carbon Pricing and Leadership Coalition to ensure that we have carbon pricing in our continent. So what do we need? Aid has been going to Africa for years. But what is the impact? The impact is very little. So often you hear of billions of dollars that have been sent to the continent through different agencies and government. USAID, Global Environment Facilities, Green Climate Fund, World Bank, and others. But does this aid and the funds get to the right people? The answer is no. So there is need to restructure how aid benefits the common man in Africa. And of course, there is the complaint that many African countries are unable to access some of the grants because they cannot come up with the bankable proposals that the World Bank, the Global Environment Facility, or the Green Climate Funds require. So most of these funds go to South American countries like Brazil and others. So of course there is need for institutional capacity of many African countries so that they can access this aid that will help majority of the citizens. Thank you. I'm happy to take some of your questions.
I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, Tom.
Yeah, this is Tom Wilson. As I said before we started, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Sierra Leone, and so my perspective is admittedly 50 years old, which is, bogus just on the face of it. But I question within the infrastructure, is the economic infrastructure in many of the countries in Africa sufficient to efficiently distribute the dividends? Or would that be done by cell phone payments, or I don't know, just how do you perceive that occurring?
Thank you, Tom. This question comes up very often, and I'll use my country as an example. But first of all, let me apologize to you all that I had to do that presentation via record because of the poor internet connection. So I'm happy to be here, and the internet is working today. So back to your question, Tom. So in Nigeria, we are about 200 million people. We are not sure if we are 200 million because we don't have data. We're not sure of the data. We don't even know who is a Nigerian. And this is reality in many other African countries. There is no infrastructure, just like you said. But yes, we can look at existing infrastructures like mobile phones, the mobile money transfer, among others. But of course, these are some of the things we would like to discuss in our little groups, breakouts soon. So if you have any other question, I might just take one more and then we'll proceed. Thank you.
I'm curious what some of the CCL volunteers from Africa would have to say in answer to the question that we were asked, which is if the Secretary of State comes to you all in your countries and says, we'd like to enter climate change diplomacy with you, what's your ask?
Okay, so that is going to be part of our questionnaire soon. So our technical assistants, I think it's better we go out to the questionnaire right away and then we can break into groups. So we already have an ask and you see it. So we'll discuss it and see which ones are best. So the questions are already over there. So thank you. So clearly you can see our acts and we can see how we all voted. So these are some of the things we'll be discussing. We are about 28 people in this group. Our technical assistants will help to share us maybe into 5 or 6 or as the case may be, and then we'll have the opportunity to meet each other and discuss a little bit more on some of these acts, and then we'll report back and we'll go to the plenary session. Happy to have you all back. I think a few persons are trying to get back. We have a few more minutes and then we'll join the plenary session to report back. So we had, I think, about 5 groups. So we would quickly, just one person from each group, just run through and basically tell us what stood out from your conversation based on the votes, and if there are anything we need to add or to subtract. Let's do that now. So group 1, anyone?
People might not know which group that was.
Okay, so maybe we should just.
Sorry, Mike. I think we all know our goals. For me, I think I'm in group 5. So I believe before going to the different sessions, we have our different group numbers.
Okay, so let's, who is in group 1? Group 1, can you, anyone in group 1? But if you don't.
1.
Yeah. Okay.
I was in group 1, I believe.
All right.
So we talked about energy and how the need for more sustainable energy and renewable energy. And we talked about, you know, the use of firewood for cooking and how pervasive that is, and maybe some alternatives to that. So Henry helped us out in our discussion.
Thank you, group 1. So that goes to the question number 1, technology transfer. So green energy, we want clean energy, solar, wind.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot do that in Africa. We can't get good technology from the US, reliable, not from China, sorry. Okay, so group 2. Anyone in group 2?
David, maybe identify the topic of the group. That might help with people knowing which group they were in.
I was in group 2, I know.
Okay, so group 2, you can just go out. I think we all discussed the questions, the poll questions. So we just want to see if there are specific highlights that are not in the poll questions that we can add here and report back to the plenary. So group 2, over to you. Thank you.
We spoke about
our biggest, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say our biggest recurring theme was, can you hear me? So we've got a little bit in besides that. It's mostly the need for, we heard from Muhammad and Joseph, the need for capacity building just to have the data to be able to provide dividends. And that requires technology transfer to have technology to do that.
Thank you so much. Group 2, capacity building, yes. So group 3, I was in group 4 and I know they are still here. So David, Sarah, you're free.
We had several different of the options chosen. I chose the border carbon suspension. Carol chose capacity building. Ronald, I couldn't quite hear what it was that you were supporting, and Sarah weighed in on women's issues. So I would say I think it's fair to say there wasn't a consensus on which one was most important, but there were a lot of interesting ideas about how any of them might work.
Thank you so much, David. One point which I took from you, which is very important, I mentioned here, is that we should suspend the carbon border adjustment program. But, you know, when we get to the border, the US government can collect the money, but give it back to Africa. So that was interesting. Thank you. So group 5.
Yes, Mike. Group 5, we discussed about capacity building and policies, information in the area for different African countries, because we believe that most of our policies in Africa, they are there on the shelves, but they are not working. So like we need more of capacity building to see how we could engage our policies makers, especially members of parliament, the faith-based organizations in the area of environmental issues. And also made mention of renewable energy, especially in the area of cooking, as you made mention of that too. So that's what we discuss. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. At this point, we would be returning to the plenary. Our time is over. But thank you so much for participating in this conversation. It was great meeting with you and hearing all your very useful contribution, and I quite appreciate it. So thank you. You can just leave the group now, and then you go back to the plenary if you can still
There we
remember
go.
the name. So
And
the
the-
link is in the
Thank
chat
you.
now.